Walking in two worlds, being a non-indigenous kinship carer. Hello everybody, welcome. Here we are, Signposts for Living with Dr. Kirsten Hunter, and I've got the gorgeous Jodi here. Hello.
Hello.
This is Jodi Robinson, everybody. And you've come, we're finally here.
We are, and it's raining a lot.
It is raining a lot. How many times have we tried to make this happen?
About 3.
I know, here we are. We did it. I'm a bit excited about that. Okay, so we are talking about a really interesting topic here, which is being a kinship carer for someone who's Indigenous when you are non-Indigenous.
Yes.
Which, boom, opens up a lot of very interesting topics there straight away.
Yeah, and people are curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just love the idea of opening up that world to people and educating them. And absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, can you give us a sense of where you are on this planet? What do you do? Who's in your family, broadly speaking?
Yep. So I'm an only child myself. That is interesting. But I was raised by my auntie and uncle.
Right.
So I guess I have a sense of what it's like to not be raised by your biological parents.
Yeah.
And family, because they were my family. They were my aunties and uncles.
So kinship situation there.
Yeah, but a non-Indigenous kinship sort of situation. So I guess that's familiar to me. Successfully, I guess. I feel like I was raised successfully by my auntie and uncle.
So it was a positive experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hindsight's a great thing, and I can think back now and I'm just so grateful.
Yeah.
Really grateful.
Absolutely. So you really became part of their family?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And not having any brothers and sisters of my own. My cousins became my brother and sister. My auntie became my mum. My uncle became my dad. And, my uncle's family became my family as well. And sort of everybody got upgraded.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. So just that's a lovely story in itself.
Everyone got upgraded. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So now I've got my own family. So I'm married, and I have 4 children of my own.
What ages are they?
So 15, 14, 13 and 11. So we had 4 children in 3.5 years. So I guess I was keen to have a big family because I didn't have a big family myself.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to be alone.
Yeah.
And then we've ended up with our own family member. And he has become our 5th child.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you are now the kinship carer of this young man.
Yes.
And tell me how he came to be in your world.
So before his story began, my husband and I became respite carers.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we were respite carers for an Aboriginal girl who was in my son's class. So I guess forefronting the fact that my husband is actually Aboriginal from southwest Queensland. And when my older son was in prep, this little girl who was in care with non-Indigenous carers, every time she saw him, she would hug him.
Really?
That really strong connection of identity and looking like him, and she just knew that he must be family. And
it's very powerful.
Yeah, and over the years we got to know this family, and it just came to a situation where we were aware they needed support. I was working in special education at the time as a teacher, so I was very aware of the needs of this particular child, and she had very high needs. And so I guess my husband and I felt it was natural to offer that support as their friends. And we had her for 3 years. So we would have her on the weekends and on the holidays. And so my children were exposed at that time to what it meant to help another family and to be a caring family in that formality, I guess. So we had discussed whether or not we were wanting to be proper foster carers, I guess, at some point. I remember when my oldest child was born, we were actually looking after other family members at that time, and we were approached to become regular carers. And we were about to sign the papers, and then I came home that afternoon and found out I was pregnant with our first child, and so we put a hold on it.
Sure, yep.
So it's always been there, I guess, in conversations with my husband, but we didn't follow through with it. And so the story of our special young man was that just a normal day, and I was aware that this child was floating around with family in community, in where we are now.
And he's related to your husband?
He's related to my husband, yeah. And I got a phone call. So as an educator, as a teacher, I'm a mandate reporter. And I got a phone call from Child Safety alerting me to the fact that I was mandated to report where this particular child was, and they took that very seriously. And so right from the get-go, I was sort of in a position of, do I tell the truth and, protect my career? What will the impacts or consequences of this be for my extended family, for this child? I didn't know the full story about what was going on for him.
Why the hesitancy in explaining where he was?
I guess I was aware that there had been issues with authority. So I knew that family weren't particularly trusting the police, child safety, the education department, and this particular child had ran from a residential house in the middle of the night.
So clearly didn't feel safe.
Wasn't safe.
Negative experience.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, and there you were thinking, am I going to play a role now for these people he didn't feel safe with to come and intervene?
And obviously my goal is always that I'm a peacekeeper by trade, so it's always I'm wanting to make sure everybody's okay. But in this particular situation, I didn't really know what to do.
Yeah.
I felt like, of course, we trust the police, we trust authority, we trust them, they're the protectors. But then I'd also heard stories before, and in my own education and in my own experience, I was also very aware that particular communities have not had a positive experience and had felt very victimised and mistreated and misunderstood by these same departments. So I was, and I trusted my family as well. So when they were telling me that they didn't trust these authorities, I also had to listen. So I guess I was very smart in how I spoke to them, and I sort of said, well, tell me why. What's going to happen to this child?
Yep.
I'm aware that this is a complex situation. I'm aware that this child does not feel safe in care. So I would like to know what's going to happen to this information. So basically they told me that they were just wanting to do a check to make sure he was safe. So that would be an audio check over the mobile phone, and if family members could just get him to ring the authorities, then that would be it. That would be it. I was like, oh, sure, yeah, no, I can, that's fair enough. So I alerted them to where he was placed, and they, obviously family were not particularly happy with me at that point, and it wasn't until later on that I understood why. It ended up being that authorities were not happy enough with just that, and they also then wanted to do a visual check. And I remember very clearly us being invited over to our family members who had this child, and it was that wasn't uncommon for us to all go over as a family and have family barbecues, and there's a big mob. There's a lot of people that go there for a family barbecue. But on this particular day, it was different. There was a lot more anxiety. There was a lot more dressing differently, presenting the house in a particular way. The lawn was mowed. It was extra effort.
Right.
And myself and some of my other non-Indigenous sister-in-laws were there as well. So it was. We knew something was different on that particular day. It ended up being that we were told that authorities would come past at 6 o'clock to do a visual check. They didn't. And then I remember my husband later telling me, I was like, why didn't they come? They said they were going to come and they didn't come, and we were all there, and he said, I don't think you really understand. They won't come when they see all of us there. There was too many people as witnesses. They will come back in the early hours of the morning.
So you were there as a prop?
A prop, yeah.
To deter the authorities from visiting?
Yep.
Why would the authorities want to visit when there aren't people there?
Because they would have the upper hand and there's no witnesses if we weren't there.
Oh gosh.
And I didn't really believe that.
You're like, I'm so green.
Yeah, and I didn't think I was green. I thought I had a really grasp and understanding of a lot of the stories I'd heard about families. I've worked in Indigenous education for over 20 years, so this isn't a new area to me. Been married to my husband for 16 years.
Right, absolutely.
So I've heard a lot of stories. I've known a lot of people. Yeah. As it turned out, long story short, my own children stayed there that night because, I was like, yeah, sure, stay. And the police did come and they did arrest him that morning without adult supervision. After that...
And when you say him, arrested him, your young person?
Yeah, so he was 11 years age at that time.
Why would you arrest an 11-year-old? Can you arrest an 11-year-old?
Well, because he was considered under care. We were not his legal guardians. The government is his legal guardian, and so at that point, I guess it's considered that he doesn't need another representative. If the police are the representative of the authorities, if child safety gives the police that authority, I guess, then they consider that supervision. Yeah. So,
my head's hurting. So the police are able to represent themselves to the police.
Child safety to the police. The child safety are allowed to nominate the police
point,
to be.
Though?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely.
If you had a child engaging with the police, you would want to be there as a representative.
Correct. His voice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So when you say arrested, do you mean brought back into care?
He was taken to the police station. Yeah. So and he was allegedly charged with some incidents that had occurred from the residence that he had ran from. So I think at that moment when I was told that that's what happened, I guess that was my aha moment as to this is not going to play out the way I had thought these sorts of situations played out.
Right.
And I guess that was my very first experience to be cautious and to know that something just wasn't right with the way that these sorts of things play out. And so I guess I felt a little bit responsible for that situation because I was the one that was mandated to make that relay that information.
Sure.
And I take my career very seriously. I take the protection of children very seriously, having come from my own trauma.
Absolutely.
And I understood that. So for me, I can look back on authorities as a child and they were my saviours and my protectors. So it was hard for me to understand that for this particular child, that was not the case.
That was not his experience.
That was not his experience. So there was a lot of feelings, I guess. I felt maybe that family might have been a little bit disappointed with me, and that I didn't trust them when they were telling me what to do. So I guess I learnt from that day that next time I was in a position to make decisions about this particular child, that I really did need to listen to them.
Right.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, what happened after that was he was formally charged.
At the age of 11?
At 11.
I would have thought under the age of 16 you couldn't be.
He came with 3 charges, we found out. And it was proposed to my husband and myself that unless there was family who were willing to take him on full-time, that he was going to be moved to another residential care in Ipswich, which is closer to Brisbane in Queensland, and that would be it.
What does residential care mean?
So residential care is when children are, I guess, still under the award, the estate, but they live with carers. So these carers can be, it's a job for them. So they're supervisors.
So we've got a lot of children living in what kind of dwelling?
Well, it could be like a 3-family bedroom house, and they have 1 adult or 2 adults who are supervising 3 or 4 students in that particular house.
Yep.
Most of those students, and I guess I'm just speaking from what I know, this isn't, authority speaking, but they have come from multiple placements, and I guess they're deemed the children that nobody wants to take.
Yeah, they're really difficult children.
Yeah. And so, at night time, those carers will lock themselves in their room for protection, and then the children can be free rein, but still legally under the care of the people in the house. So he was 11 and he was living with 18-year-olds.
My gosh.
17-year-olds, nearly 18-year-olds. Yeah. So, you think about that. I would never let my children do that. Yet, given the complex trauma he had already suffered, he was in that particular situation, and that situation deemed very unsafe for him. And he felt the need to leave that particular dwelling in the middle of the night. So to me, that speaks volumes. Yeah, about how he felt about the decisions that authority were making for him and his safety, especially considering he had been removed from his own family and felt that the way that he was being treated now was worse, you know, or incomparable to what it was that he felt he was removed from.
And, you know, we don't want to get into it, but basically there were some experiences there that were detrimental, and he had an incident and he needed to go and needed to leave to feel safe.
Yes. Yep. So, yeah, we were given that phone call. We were given 3 hours. And I actually forgot to mention that when they first asked me where they were, they gave me 3 hours before they would do an Amber Alert.
What's an Amber Alert?
So an Amber Alert is when the police will put out like a social media call. So, you know, you might see it on Facebook or you might see it on UPS News to say that we're looking for this particular child. And then if they found out that I had information about him, it would become a legal proceeding that I was withholding information if they found out that I knew where he was.
Wow.
So we, again, were given that sort of choice.
There's a real duress situation there.
Yeah. So we were given this particular choice that if we didn't take him within 3 hours, he would then be moved on. Yeah. So, I mean, you don't often, you know, I spent more time than that thinking about having my own children, let alone taking a child that I had met once at a barbecue.
With 3 hours notice, making a life choice there.
Correct, yeah. With already 4 of my own, working full-time. My husband worked full-time.
Knowing that this child was really having a very rough time, it would be probably a bit tricky.
What do?
You do the right thing.
Well, I think,
him.
yeah, and I think my husband and I, so we're Christians, so we have a faith. We believe in the fact that there's a plan for us. We believe that our stories are important. We believe that we were together for a reason. We believe that we're unified over common values around family. And we felt like that we had been given a home. We had reached all of our childhood dreams. And we felt that we were equipped to at least try to see. And when we spoke to our children about it, I guess my husband sold it to them that this is a matter of life and death.
Yep.
This isn't about whether we want to have another child. It's not about how are we going to share our bedrooms or how's our time going to be spent or who's going to look after him, what's our disciplinary plan, how are we going to feed him, how are we going to clothe him, what happens if, you know, he has such complex trauma that he enacts that out on our own children.
Yeah.
Like, what is this going to look like? How are we going to get him to school? What happens if he doesn't want to go to school? Like, so all of those things I guess you hear in media about what it is to have a child from care. You know, they flash through your brain, but we didn't have time to go into that. It was a natural reflex to go, this is life and death. If he doesn't stay with us, he's going to die. And that's how we viewed it.
Because you could really see the sequence of events that were going to evolve, and it was going to deteriorate from that place.
Correct. And we'd also know generationally within his own family that this was the pinnacle of maybe some of the, you know, the situations that other family members had been in. So we knew that this was the start of the end for him. And it was that easy. So a lot of people would say to me, and I also have, you know, a lot of people of faith say to me, oh, we couldn't have done that. I was like, we didn't have time. It was, we have him, he's alive, and that's all it is. It was as simple as that, even though it was so complex.
Yeah. You thought about the broader issue, not the detail.
We did, and I also think it was also the loyalty of my husband to his family.
So tell me about that culturally. What's that about?
So I guess when I was explaining before that everybody in my family were upgraded, I've learned very quickly being within my husband's family, so within the Indigenous community, that everybody's upgraded from birth.
What do you mean?
So, you know, like their cousins are their brothers.
Right.
And if they have a second cousin who's older, well, then that's their auntie or their uncle. You know, your grandparents, brothers and sisters are almost like your second grandparents. So everybody gets an upgrade. Everybody's closer than what I've been brought up with. Yet I could relate to that because of the situation I was brought up in with being cared for by my own auntie and uncle. So it made sense to me, and I loved it.
So there's this real sense of community and the ties being brought together.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think my husband felt that out of loyalty and love, that he was in a place to say yes, and it would be very wrong of him to say no. And there was absolutely no reason for him to say no.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you were both on the same page with your level of openness to this.
Yeah, we came to the same page, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I also felt very honoured to be an auntie within the Indigenous community. So
tell me more.
So I guess there's this sense of, that upgrade. I got upgraded. So when we have cousins over all weekend, every weekend, and you do become like their second mum. And some of them need it, some of them don't. Some of them need it on some days and not on other days. And for myself as well, not having, lots of family, I've really benefited from having my sister-in-laws or my brother-in-laws become the second parents to my children as well. So I've lived that and experienced it and I'm grateful for it. So I guess I felt it a real honour in a way that I could be that for someone else's child, because I understood the power of what that could be. And I also, a lot of people would say I could never love someone else's child like I love my own.
Oh, see, I don't get that.
Yeah.
I really don't.
And I guess I take that personally.
Because you were loved, but you were the kinship child.
Yeah, I was the kinship child. And, going back a little bit, unfortunately, my auntie, who I view as my mother role, ended up passing away. And so I've got unresolved issues, or unresolved gratitude of being able to show her what she did. Yeah. She died when I was quite young, when I was 19. So she never really got to see who I married or my children or what I ended up being, or to be proud to be able to have her go, we did the right thing, look what we did.
Yeah.
So I almost saw it as a way to go, I know how to do this, because I remember what my auntie and uncle did. And I had full confidence in my husband because he's a great father. And I just knew that we could give it a shot. And the rest, I guess, is a bit of history.
So he came along at the age of 11, and your other kids were under that age?
So my oldest child was 6 months younger than him, so same age.
Yeah, same age, right.
Yeah.
So tell me about how things were at the beginning with finding your feet, finding how the family responded to you, how traumatised was this child, how did he go with fitting in?
Sure. So in the first month of having this child, we ended up with 22 new people from authorities in our house daily.
What?
So we would have random police checks. We would have, because he was under the authority of an out west child safety department, and we were in Toowoomba, so a different region, he was... they would send local child safety officers to come and check to make sure he was still with us. It was almost like they didn't trust us. There was a mistrust. And I didn't understand that, because I thought, if I'm a mandate reporter and I'm a qualified teacher, well, what else do you need?
Why was there such a mistrust?
That's his story, I think, and that's his family's story. There's certainly one there.
Okay.
But he was very much a symbol of generational interactions with child safety.
Okay.
And I guess he was considered a bit of a token in the community that he came from, in the fact that they wanted him to pay. They did want him locked up. They did want him to be away from family. And because we were still family, we were also treated like his original family. And that was a shock to me as well.
So you're saying there was some bias against
there was some bias,
you guys from the authority.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've never had bias from authorities before, because I am middle-aged, white, European-centred woman.
So you haven't experienced that bias?
I haven't experienced that bias before from authorities. I've experienced it in our marriage in other situations, but not from authority, from people that I had previously grown up with being my protectors.
What an incredible contrast.
Yeah.
So you were kind of walking in the shoes of perhaps the more Indigenous experience with the authorities.
Yep, and I remembered relaying to other people my experience, and they didn't believe me. So they go, no, surely that was a mistake. Maybe he'd done something wrong. Maybe this had happened. I'm like, no, that's not what happened. I'm telling you what happened. So that was very traumatic for us as a family. I was still working full-time. My husband was still working full-time. We had these 4 children, and they were terrified.
Yeah, authorities knock, knock, knock.
Yeah. So it would be that when we first got him, we had 4 children in a little tiny bedroom, all the boys shared together, and he built a cubby house. And every time somebody or a car would drive up to the front of our house, he would hide.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, it could have been anybody. Could be somebody stopping outside our street to listen to a phone call, and he would hide because he had that high level of anxiety and mistrust and fear.
That flight
and
response.
out of control. 22 people we had, entities, child safety, youth justice, solicitors. And so after we got him, we then were given his rap sheet. And it was only after we committed to taking him that we were given all of these responsibilities, like you have to take him to court on this day and he's going to have to go to restorative justice on this day. And it just became this whirlwind of, we just said we'd look after this kid.
Yeah.
You didn't tell us that we would be doing all these things. And what I found the most difficult was we were asked to do those things, but we were never given the reason, the backstory. So when I questioned it, I wouldn't get a story. I wouldn't get an answer, and they would just say, that's not your business. You're his carer, but we're his legal authority.
But weren't you his advocate at this point, so therefore it was your business?
Yeah. And I felt really angry in the fact that it was okay to put, perceived our family in danger, or not in danger, but to put our whole family through this. So as a whole Indigenous family, they were willing to put us through this, but didn't think about how that was affecting the other 4 children. And that made me really angry.
Well, yeah, protective mum. Yeah.
Yeah, so it ended up being that my husband did take him. We took him to all of these things. And again, my experience in those places was just of massive bias. And I just could not believe it. My husband kept saying, why are you shocked? I'm like, I am really shocked.
A bias against Indigenous people in the criminal system.
Yes. And it also became very clear to me that because I wasn't Indigenous and I'm an educated person, and I was working at a high level of Indigenous education at that time, that I was asking questions that weren't welcomed.
You were inconvenient.
I was inconvenient. So they'd almost banked on the fact that nobody was going to advocate for this child and that they could get rid of him and clean up the community that he came from. So when I was able to go, where's your evidence of that? Why is this happening? We were not presented with anything. So it ended up being that because my husband was able to advocate for him at court, I was able to advocate for him at restorative justice. The charges were dropped, and we were told that the charges he were under should never have been done for 11-year-old anyway. So that was questionable. So I guess we cleared all that mud, and then he just came home with us. And it just became that boring, everyday routine of you wonderful. Go to school, you come home.
How wonderful.
Yeah, and that was probably the first 6 months, but the first 6 months were hard. The children didn't cope with it very well. I think they thought it was like getting a puppy. It was exciting for the first little while. He was a cousin. So they loved the fact that there was someone new in the house, someone new to play with, a bit of novelty.
New playmate, yeah.
He brought tons of culture with him. I would say at that point my children did not have a strong knowledge of culture, and he brought that into our family.
How great.
My oldest child, the one that's 6 months under, did not cope very well at all. So I remember going on our family camping trip with other families, and they were just all fighting. They were just, his honeymoon period had worn off. It's almost like for the first 6 months he had to be nice to us so we would like him and keep him safe. And then he was like, well, where am I? I'm going to go now. Where am I going to go? Am I going to go back home? Am I going to go here? Am I going to go there?
Yep.
And it was like, well, you're staying with us.
Time to move. That's what he was used to.
He was used to it. And then he had that realisation that it's actually not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And then that's when, obviously some of his instinctual behaviours came out, and then it starts to affect everybody. And we're tired because we've just been through all this emotional thing. And I do remember my older son just, saying, like, if you don't get rid of him, I'm going to kill myself, and can't we take him back? And so all of a sudden we're like, what are we doing to our own children?
Oh, big issues here.
How do you, and it was the very first time we were like, how do you balance the care of a child who is vulnerable in need versus the needs of your own child that you are legally responsible for too, but in very different ways?
And they're all children.
And they're all children.
And your young person, he would be pushing you to see whether or not you're going to become another person who's going to abuse him or neglect him, abandon him.
Absolutely.
So there's going to be lots of testing of boundaries.
Yes.
And he's a kid.
Yes. And he's missing home.
Yeah, massive adjustment issues.
And he did not choose to be with us.
Yeah.
It was not his choice. And it was not our children's choice. And it wasn't our choice. It was something we felt like we had to do, but we didn't know where it was going post that day. So, yeah, it's been a long journey. And it's been really difficult to share that with people because they bring their own knowledge or bias again to what they think the situation is or how they think you should do that role, or they'll bring their own opinion.
Can you give any concrete examples?
So I remember the day that we got him. I felt like I had to go and explain to another family that we were very close with, and we'd spent the day before talking about our oldest children going to high school and what rules we would implement. You know, like that tight knit ship group of, well, if this is a swear word in my house, we'll make it a swear word in your house, and we'll be united, and we'll raise these boys together. And I'm not even going to say what words we thought were swear words. But then the next day I had to go back to her and say, by the way, you know how we were talking yesterday about, our really strong boundaries and behaviour plan? I've now just picked up this child in care who's on charges. I know nothing about him. I don't know what his story is. And I just need to tell you that if you don't feel comfortable in bringing your children to my house, that's okay, because I don't know what is going to happen in our house. I don't know what it's going to look like. So I almost felt like I had to apologise to people to say, this is who we are now. If you're not comfortable with that, I'm really sorry. Because for the first time in my parenting, I'd lost control. We had to do things differently.
Is control important to you?
Yes.
Why?
Well, that comes from my own trauma.
Exactly.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, it was triggering my own trauma. So firstly, I said yes to this child because I was grateful for the experience I had, and I wanted to pass that on. And I wanted to experience it from the carer's perspective. But then very quickly it started to trigger my own demons, I guess. Well, not demons, but things that I hadn't really thought about for a long time. And, it became difficult.
And you just had to take it one day at a time?
A day at a time. So I, being a teacher, I know a lot about suspensions and, behaviour records and what the expectations of schools are. And I'd always considered myself to be quite a conservative teacher, very strict but fair, very high expectation. And I learnt really quickly, or should I say my husband taught me really quickly, that there is a different way to raise children from what I had learnt from, this white.
And what did that look
way.
like? Yeah.
I learnt very quickly that I would say things to him like, you can't do that, that's rude. Or you can't speak to people like that because that's not okay. And I remember my husband saying to me, white people tell, Indigenous people tell a story and let the child figure out the moral of the story.
So very different framework. Very
different. And so I knew very quickly, because I represented the very first person that he felt safe with as a white person. And I learnt very quickly that he was always going to struggle with me more because I represented that. And he'd never had a positive relationship with a white middle-class woman before.
Yeah, you would have triggered him.
I triggered him, and he triggered me.
He triggered you because of the control issue?
Yeah, and the way he would speak to me was a trauma of my own abuse,
right.
my own childhood of just emotional abuse. So I had no option but to try something different, because the way I was working was just triggering him far too much, and I was losing control then.
Did you learn how to work within that more Indigenous approach with regard to stories?
Oh, I tried, but I also then learnt really quickly that I didn't have the stories he needed. Wow. So my husband, I just remember watching my husband once and just going, how did you do that? I'm the qualified one. So I guess when we first got him, we sort of made this rule, or it was almost like this subconscious rule when we had children, that I would raise them and feed them and educate them, And my husband would discipline and teach them skills and do the sports and do that. We almost had this unspoken role description about how our marriage would work. And I think most people do that, what that was going to look like. And all of a sudden we were just confronted on what's our roles here, because this is different.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden my husband started parenting. I don't think he parented differently, but I just didn't see it, or I didn't value it. And he would tell stories about family. And he would tell stories about this child's father, who was very close to. And he would, share stories like, oh, if Uncle did that, or if Uncle so-and-so did that, and, and your nan heard that, what would happen? And he'd say, oh, this would happen, So then what's going to happen to you if you do that?
So really putting that choice in a sense of context, placement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying it's more important that he figures out what the right decision is for himself rather than someone else tell him.
Now that is brilliant. That internal sense of,
Yep.
we call it locus of control, but the internal ownership of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also that he was relating to the people he loved and admired in the community. And that was that connection back to family. Even though he wasn't with that family, we could keep that alive. And I think we learnt really early that was critical.
To really
Very
show that
critical.
valuing and to keep that connection.
Yeah. And also to show that we were still part of his immediate family. We were just an extension of that. And my husband was very big on talking to him about stories before he was born, to sort of cement the fact that Uncle had been a part of his life before he even was. And so that was Uncle's authority in his life.
So he hasn't lost his family.
No.
You're a part of his family.
Yep.
And, this is the room over here that you live in.
Yep. And because of their connection and their relationship, he has authority over him.
Yeah.
He has his family's approval to be the authority over him. And I think that's very different in an Indigenous kinship situation compared to another foster care situation.
And by your marriage, does that give you authority?
Yes, it does, certainly in our house. But there are times where I will have to recognise that I'm not the right person to speak on behalf of family. So I guess if there is a situation that comes up that is about him connecting with his own immediate family, I will step out of that position and I will hand that to my husband, because I recognise that I don't know the full story. I don't know the context behind that, and it's important that the right decision is made, and it's okay that I'm not making that decision. So that's when, at times my control, I've had to really let go and trust my husband. And he might come up with a discipline or a decision, and I will always go, no, that's bad, this will happen, and research says this, and I've got a kid at school and that happens, oh, you don't want to do that. And he'll just say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. And lo and behold, 99% of the time, he's always right.
You're a good team.
Yeah. And so that has strengthened our marriage, because all of a sudden I've seen him in a cultural lens that I've never seen him before. I don't remember him parenting like that before this child came along, because I was there.
So your 4 other children, and notice I say other children because this child is your other child, right? You've got 5. You've parented them yourself and your husband's Indigenous. So why was he not doing the same Indigenous parenting with your other 4 children, because they're Indigenous as well?
Yeah.
Sorry, is that a curveball question?
No, it's complex, and I guess I just have to make sure I don't speak on his behalf. But so I've just come out of working in Indigenous education around languages.
Sure.
And my husband has always told me he doesn't have a traditional language. He doesn't have a language. He speaks, English. And when I went and did this training, I realised that he actually does have a language. He has a dialect from his community. And when I'd learnt about this particular language at my formal training at the top of Education Queensland, I broke down in tears because it was not acknowledged in our family that he had a language. Therefore, my children didn't know that they were exposed to a language. And it broke my heart to think that I had thought that I had known so much about Indigenous culture and language and education, to actually go, I don't know this at all.
If he had he has a dialect of a language, why didn't he identify as having a language?
So that comes back to, I guess, the effects of colonization, and that's a long story. That's probably another whole hour.
Yeah.
But I guess he was brought up in school that he had to speak English and he had to speak it well, and they were punished if they did not. And a lot of people were even killed in his community for not speaking English well, because it was a sign of a culture in which they were trying to exterminate.
So we're talking previous generations.
We're talking of previous generations, but also he opened up to me about his experience as a student at school, and being in a position as a teacher that broke my heart. And so that ignited some trauma for my own husband to be able to say, I've been this kid at school, I've been this kid in certain situations, this is how he feels. So it almost became like I could share experiences with this child based on my own trauma and being raised by my own auntie and uncle, but then my husband could also share very deeply around what it was like to be raised, to grow up as an Indigenous boy in a community, and the biases and the racial experiences that he might be exposed to as well.
So this opened your eyes to learning more about your husband?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yep. And how sad is it to think that we'd been married for 13 years and I'd never heard these stories. And I remember him saying that when we got married, he almost sort of passively stopped the language.
Why?
Because you only speak that language with people that speak that language as well, and I did not.
Right.
So I'd heard him speak it with family, I'd heard him speak it when we went home back into community, and I'd question him and I'd say, why do you say that word? And he couldn't tell me. He'd go, that's just what we say. And I guess because there was that me questioning him in a negative tone, like, well, how do you say it? Oh, that's silly. He then went, oh, well, I won't do that in front of you.
Oh, wow.
And so for me to be learning in my role just how important this was.
To his identity and connection.
And then he had to do it with this child because this child spoke that language. It was just incredible.
So it brought it back alive again.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And not only did it do that, it actually taught our own children. So we always say he brought the flavour to our family. We were a very bland family until he came. My children have taught him how to walk in a more white world, I should say, even though they're Indigenous themselves, but they are quite fair-skinned.
Yeah.
And so they'd had a different experience growing up as an Aboriginal children. And he had brought culture to them and taught them what it was like to grow up in the community that their family originate from.
Can I ask, when you and your husband got together, he's Indigenous and you're a blonde little whitey, how did you come across any difficulties with acceptance on either parties there?
That's a good question. I don't remember it back then. I had worked in a school where I had taught his brothers, so I was actually very heavily connected to the family before I met him, and he was living out of town. So he was the last brother that I met. So also at our youth group, I had led a lot of Indigenous families and children as a youth worker. So to me, and I'd also had Indigenous family members within my other side of the family, so it was something that I had felt very comfortable about. It was something that was pretty normal to me, and I had a lot of friends who were married interracially, with one Indigenous person, one non-Indigenous person, so it was sort of semi-normal to me. In fact, I almost considered it a privilege. I loved the fact that he had a big family, and I guess I saw it as I'm gaining a big family, and that was so exciting. Of course, just like any other married couples, you're trying to create your own family culture. And as any multicultural family would know, there's differences. And within that, it was about us trying to create what our family culture would be with the influence of my British influence, of my auntie and uncle's influence, plus his influence of his family as well. So certainly there were points, but like I said, that's quite normal in a lot of interracial relationships. And I guess not having strong, a big, strong family around me, it was easier for me to accept differences. But my husband and I were very definitive about making sure we created our own version.
That's beautiful.
And not be told what our family and our parenting and our household would look like.
How did your young man go with jumping into the education system, with jumping into routine, standards of behaviour, uniform, all of those sorts of things, fitting into that world? How did that go?
I remember at his enrolment and ironically, he ended up going to the same school that I was teaching at. I wasn't there at the time, but I knew I would go back. So there was almost this fear of, I prided myself on the behaviour of my children. I prided myself on my own teaching expectations of students. To have to bring a child to an enrolment meeting of what I would consider a very strict conservative school was scary, because I didn't think that would be the right place for him. I thought he'd last a week, tell someone where to go and we'd be gone. And I was very nervous about that experience. And I'm going to be honest and say I was nervous about how it was going to reflect on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this child is not a child I'd raised. It's a child that we were given, but we haven't, invested our key principles or beliefs or, values into. So it was complex. We worked very closely with the school. I was very lucky, obviously, that I had relationships with a lot of the teachers in the school. So because of my friendships with them, they were happy to listen to our advice and to implement that. They really trusted us. And I must say that's something that I don't see a lot of within education, that we trust the Indigenous families to listen to their advice if we're recommending to do something differently. And like I said, all of a sudden I became that family member.
Which is all about cultural sensitivity, isn't it?
I didn't have to advocate for my own children in the same way.
To learn. Yeah.
I never had to advocate for my children before.
Yeah.
And it made me realise just how much culture my children were not getting exposed to in education. So I remember my daughter saying she doesn't like it when they talk about Aboriginal people at school. It makes her feel sick.
What?
That was previous to this child coming.
What was she referring to?
She just felt uncomfortable about hearing about what people said, and people had expectations of her about what knowledge she would have.
Oh, pressure. Okay. So not a negative concept.
A little bit too, about what other students were saying around her or what teachers might comment on. And again, I remember being saddened about that.
Of course, yeah.
So I guess we saw this as an opportunity to... sounds terrible, but I saw it as an opportunity to upskill teachers.
No, everyone learning, great.
Yeah.
And to
come on that journey with us.
Yeah. And so he was 11 when he came into your care. Mm-hmm. How old is he now?
He's just turned 16.
There you go.
Yep.
And what growth have you seen in him? Can we talk now about what all of this groundwork and, this we talked earlier about how you need to tailor to the cultural sensitivity, but also how you need to just bring him into the fold and just have him be like, the sameness with everybody else, with how you are with your other kids and everything like that.
Yep.
So where now? Where have you brought him to?
So I remember very clearly when we first got him that I was desperate, absolutely desperate for it to be a success story, because I wanted him to experience what my husband and I had experienced, a successful transition into adulthood where you could have your own family, you could have a healthy marriage, you know what your issues are, but you're dealing with them. And I was really desperate for him to have that.
Have that healthy framework, healthy launch pad into life,
To be a cycle breaker.
Yep.
And I feel like I can identify with that. I feel like I'm a cycle breaker.
I'm breaking the cycle.
Yeah. And I was desperate for him to have that same feeling for it to bring healing. So, nearly 4 years later, he's doing incredibly. So he has just completed his first year of high school in year 10, where he's had no suspensions.
Huge.
It is huge.
That's huge.
He has spent the last term completing a full term where he was at school on the last day. Mm-hmm. And I know for some people that's weird to think that we would celebrate that. But he has just received scholarship to go to a very, very good, prestigious private school in Brisbane in Queensland to pursue his AFL career. And that is incredible, because on his last day of school I said to him, is this the very first time you've left a school on your own accord? And he said yes.
Yeah.
Every other time he's left a school, it was because of child safety or a family issue and needed to move now.
This was a point of graduating. This was a point of completion, achievement, choice.
And controlling it.
in control. Yeah. And he's very sporty, and now that's got potential to take him places.
It does. He is one of ours. We will never replace his original family, and that's never our intention, nor should it be. We are an extension of his family, but for now we are the people that are guiding him until he just needs to be an adult. And I think that's how we've come to see it. I'm not his mum.
Yeah.
I'm his auntie.
Yeah.
One of. He's got lots of aunties. I'm the auntie that he has right now that is doing these things. So we've all found our place, I guess. It's interesting now that we know that he's leaving to go to a boarding school. It's interesting to see how the children respond. And it's of great sadness.
That's
They just view him as a brother. And we view him as a son. He's not ours. We're very, acknowledging of that, but he's not ours. But he is.
Yeah.
And that's what family is in a nutshell, and this is what our family looks like. So we're very proud of him. It's been a lot of tears. It's been a lot of journeys. It's been a lot of difficult conversations at 11, 12, 1 o'clock at night. There's been a lot of honesty and truthful situations about what is happening in the world, and acknowledging that it's not a rosy world in which he lives in, and the story's not over. He's going to have struggles, but him always knowing that there is a place to go back to. I think when he turned 16, there seemed to be a lot of pressure around him to leave us, or that he could self-place, and we just treated it like it was another birthday. And then tomorrow came. And I think
because that's breaking the cycle again, isn't it?
Yeah.
The old cycle would be, now you could go back and you can make these choices to take yourself
out of the system,
but also going and making some choices that will get in the way of your continued growth and your continued choices.
So he's chosen to stay in the system that he was once fearful of, because he trusts us, because we are attached now to that system. And without that system, we may not be able to support him in the way that he deserves, and he knows that we will always advocate for him, and we have. So that partnership of my husband and I being able to walk in those two worlds together has allowed us to provide him with exactly what it is that he needed. And it's interesting that I have other students now that I'm teaching again that it's almost like a formula we wish we could patent and pass on, but I understand now why we have kinship carers. I understand now why we have to keep culture strong.
And why is that?
It's because I wouldn't even say that's the best way for them. It's actually just another way of parenting that is just gold. I'm so privileged that my children get to have that parenting as well now. And it saddens me to think that if we didn't get this child, my own children would have missed out on that cultural parenting.
Because he brought in all that richness.
Yep.
Yeah. Definitely.
And it's allowed me to take a step back and go, just because I'm the dominant culture in our relationship doesn't mean I know it all, and doesn't mean I'm doing it right. And I've really appreciated my husband questioning me, and me having to articulate why I think that might be the right way to do it.
Yep.
So we've just gone on this cultural journey as to being able to know that it's okay not to do things one way or another, but having that wisdom to know, or the discernment to know who needs to take this one.
I just love your collaboration and the fact that you are listening and learning, between each other rather than just being stuck in your way. I think it's just so incredibly wise. Yeah, and you've taken this child from a history of trauma, which we haven't spoken about purposely, so a history of trauma, and you've given him this stability and respect for who he is with his Indigenous background, and now he can heal to a point where he has choices ahead of him. That's really extraordinary.
And I think the last point is to mention that he's walking in two worlds now. And I think there's a misconception that when we take these Indigenous kids into care that we make them white. We think that will make them successful if they can do all the things that they need to do in society, like they're speaking of English and, and doing things this way. Where in actual fact, they're most successful if they have both.
Absolutely.
They need to be able to have, as you said before, that choice. Do I do it this way or that way? And I have the choice to decide for myself which one I use today. And that's what I've got out of it.
Oh, Jodi, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. We could keep talking, couldn't we? Everybody, thank you. This is Jodi Robinson. Appreciate it a million.
No worries.
You're wonderful, darling. Okay, everyone, you can catch me on my website, KirstenHunterAuthor.com, Facebook and Instagram, Kirsten Hunter Author, and Twitter, Kirsten Hunter AU. Here we are, the podcast Signposts for Living with Dr. Kirsten Hunter, and also there's YouTube which is Psych in Your Car. I don't know if you've seen that. So everyone, thank you for listening in, and jump on if you've got any feedback or any areas you want us to get into. That would be just wonderful. Thank you, darling. See ya.
Bye.